Everyone knows Dark Souls has great level design, but what if the map itself was hiding a story? I've been digging through the game's files, the collision data, even the out-of-bounds areas, and the more you look, the clearer it becomes that Lordran wasn't built like a typical game world at all. Some of what you find are quirks of development, sure, but often they fit perfectly with the game's lore, even where the players were never meant to go. So let's dive into another hidden layer of Lordran and see what it has to tell us. Let's start with the game's first real questline, the Bells of Awakening. Oscar introduces the idea with the undead pilgrimage, saying to ring the bell to learn your fate. But then, on reaching the Firelink Shrine, the crestfallen warrior surprises you by saying,
"There are, actually, 2 bells of awakening. One's up above in the undead church. The other is far, far below, in the ruins at the base of Blight Town. Ring them both, and something happens. Brilliant, right?"
This is the first hint that the prophecy of the chosen undead isn't some ancient lore, something newer, maybe even recently staged. But prophecy or not, there are still 2 bells, built in the same style. They must be connected somehow. And yet, how could they be? The first bell is at least near to Sen's fortress, for the giant there. But the second is after a huge journey, who knows how far, through way too many challenges along the way. And yet, the instant you ring it, you see the giant at Sen's fortress respond, opening the gate. How can that make sense? Well, it doesn't. At least, not until you can see the world from afar. This is the first bell in the undead parish. Here is Firelink Shrine, where you begin. And here is Blight Town and the second bell. They're actually stacked almost directly above one another. Though we as players will have travelled pretty far, the total distance between the bells is actually relatively small. And more than that, Blight Town, as dark as it may feel, is open air. So while it still has to be a pretty loud bell, the sound would travel up far more easily than it seems. And to me, it suggests Lordran developed over time in accordance with its dense, vertical nature. The land was always tightly knit. And how better to communicate with a region above you out of sight than by sound? A little like mountain roads in our own world, where drivers use vehicle horns before a blind corner, just in case there's oncoming traffic. Who knows? Maybe bells weren't the only audio system used this way in Lordran. Speaking of Lordran's development, let's revisit Oolacile and Darkroot, the same land, just a few centuries apart. Now, this is a tricky comparison in some ways, lore-wise. Take New Londo for instance. We know New Londo existed long before the DLC takes place, because the Four Kings were gifted part of Gwyn's soul before he linked the flame, and that was over 1,000 years ago according to Frampt. Meanwhile, the DLC takes place only a few hundred years ago, according to Uchiyama in an interview before release. However, New Londo is missing from the DLC. In the present day, in Darkroot, you can look down and see the gate and bridge outside the city. And if I go out of bounds to walk on the bridge, it will even trigger the map to reload with the proper entrance to New Londo. But in the same place in Oolacile, there is nothing. If we go out of bounds, you can see there isn't anything rendered at all, even within the cliffside where we know New Londo lies. So not everything here can be taken as canon. Still, the differences are fascinating, and the team clearly put a lot of thought into many details between the past and present. For example, the ramparts of the mighty capital Anor Londo still loom above, though, as you might expect for optimization, none of the city itself is rendered behind. But that's the same as the base game, of course. In Sen's fortress, just below the ramparts, the capital isn't there either when we look out of bounds. Another cool detail is that not only are the same trees in Darkroot already in Oolacile, but they're even slightly thinner, since they're younger. Not to mention, each area has much the same landscape. The cliffsides, valleys, basin are all the same. So what else is different? In Oolacile, the undead burg hasn't been built yet, suggesting that's a recent undead settlement. But more than that, remember the enormous ramparts we've looked at before, that crisscross around the region? They're entirely missing, which, speculative though it is, would imply that they were a later, hurried addition, as we've previously wondered about. Though it would mean they were built after Gwyn had already left to link the flame. It's a very curious dilemma, so I'm interested to hear what you all think. To quickly focus on present-day Darkroot Garden, I for one have never really been able to picture how it all fits together, and honestly it's incredibly cool how dense it is. When you first enter Darkroot Garden and round this corner, have you ever paid attention to what's above and below you? If we follow the stone pillars here, we'll see that they support the bridge where you fight the Moonlight butterfly. And if we follow it down, we land in the secret area behind the living tree, where the frog enemies are. It's all so tightly knit. All within a stone's throw of each other are Rents, the Moonlight butterfly, a living tree, these frog enemies, a stone guardian, and of course what might be the corpse of Marvelous Chester, something we looked at in the Rings of the Four Knights video. Also, sometimes when going out of bounds, you find things that look pretty funny. In this case, it's above the stone guardian, before the wolf ring. Since it's out of bounds, the team won't have wanted to waste time making a natural landscape. But it's such a perfectly circular hole, it could fit in Sen's fortress. Anyway, that's how light filters down into that tunnel. Another curious detail relates to the bridge where you fight the Moonlight butterfly. One end connects to the tower of a fort, and the other end has broken away. But you can see here where one of its supporting pillars once stood, which is interesting since the geography doesn't seem to support the bridge continuing out in this direction. At first, you might think this is overthinking the level design, and as is often the case with lore dives, it very well might be. However, it highlights something else I never quite realised when playing the game. This entire area of Darkroot Garden, from Andre up to the Forest Hunters, is entirely new since the time of the DLC. This is where the locked door to the area would be in Oolacile. And you can see how not only is it not there, but the land behind is totally different. The same goes for the path down to the basin. From Calamete's arena, you can see how the cliffside doesn't have the path seen in the present day. So there is lots of evidence of the geography changing in the area in this short space of time. Perhaps it relates to the fall of Manus. The area had been collapsing into dark, and this is the result of the region mending. Thus, perhaps it's not a total dead end to try to consider where this bridge from the Moonlight Butterfly Fort might have once connected to. It doesn't point particularly clearly to anything, but it is in the direction of the Hydra, or the Watchtower. Diving into a world as well made as Dark Souls, even behind the curtains, is kind of inspiring. So if you're interested in learning to make games yourself, I'm happy to tell you about today's sponsor, Boot.dev. Learning to code can be really tough, and honestly drives most of us to hollow long before we reach our goal. But Boot.dev sorts everything out for you. It's a platform that teaches you coding in a way that actually feels fun. Instead of staring at endless docs, you level up, unlock chests, and even join community boss battles woven into the site's lore. Learning feels less like a slog and more like an adventure, and the skills you get are the real deal. I tried their Git course, which, trust me, is essential. Git is basically the bonfire of development. It saves your progress and lets you recover from disasters. But I focused on object-oriented programming, the backbone of most game engines, i.e. how to actually build the games you've always wanted to make. Plus, you've got options, fun teachers, audio overviews, quizzes, and more. You can make an account for free and try demos of every course. Watching lessons costs nothing. The interactive, gamified parts are what you pay for. So if you want to level up your coding skills, whether it's for games, a personal project, or even a new career, check out boot.dev and use my code for 25% off your first year on the annual plan. Moving on, one part of the map that definitely was carefully considered is the water. The main river cutting through the forest is vastly diminished in Oolacile compared to Darkroot, and instead, most of the water flowing into the basin enters from the opposite side of the valley. But the riverbed width suggests the water's volume was once much larger, and that the abyss might have shifted the water's natural course by collapsing the land. Then, in the present day, the natural flow of water has been restored. Which brings us to a question that's always bugged me. Where did all the water to flood New Londo come from? Given the state of the drowned corpses in the city, not only would a large water source have been needed, but it seems like the city was flooded very quickly too. Darkroot might seem like the obvious answer, but look closer. Its river lies on the opposite side of the Valley of the Drakes. The same valley that drains New Londo in seconds when you open the floodgates. So, unless there's some unseen aqueduct or cavern system, the connection just isn't there. So, where else are large water sources found? The depths is one candidate. A huge flow of water runs through it. But when you look at the collision data, all clipped through walls, there's no sign of a path to New Londo, which is decently far away at this point. The aqueduct by Firelink Shrine is another possibility. It's an artificial structure and could, over time, channel a significant volume of water. But its source is hard to pin down. The water flows from the outer ramparts inwards, and clipping through either end doesn't really help here. It could somehow relate to the depths given the proximity, so perhaps that's where the water comes from. If we follow the flow of water towards the inner ramparts, it's kind of disheartening since the aqueduct only reaches this far in the world. But what if we enabled the New Londo collision map too? The aqueduct is in fact not only pointing towards the human city, but it's actually very close too. So honestly, it's a decently probable solution to New Londo's flood. The only issue is that with the water flow as slow as it is, it doesn't explain how the city could have been flooded so quickly. Still, it's a good reminder that water engineering exists in Lordran, and that's likely how the lift in Blighttown once worked, before the dog took over. And the gods could easily have more such structures, hidden away for their use. Speaking of the depths, I think it's worth highlighting a few interesting details here. First, despite the dungeon-like aesthetic, and the name, the depths aren't actually that deep. Here's Firelink, and here's the depths. And this is the rest of Lordran. We're relatively high up here. I thought that was pretty interesting. Second, Firelink and the depths are also surprisingly close. In fact, Firelink once had a shortcut that would have linked up directly with the lower undead burg just before entering the depths. And though this was cut, the original design can still be seen in-game. When you're down in Blighttown, you can look up and see Firelink Shrine in the distance. It's got an odd texture, so it's hard to spot, but this is another example of an actual 3D render, rather than an image. So we can have a closer look by going out of bounds. And what's interesting is that this isn't just a low poly render of the game's central hub. It's actually got a few differences to the Firelink we know, because it was based on an earlier model in development. So here, you can see what would have been a bridge to link up with the lower undead burg. I can see why this was cut, since it makes the aqueduct shortcut kind of redundant, but it's cool we can still see this in game. And third, I want to point out how the design links so well with Blighttown. The depths is clearly meant to be some sort of sewage system originally, perhaps even for the capital, given the scale. Either way, a huge amount of waste channels through here, which means, at some point, that runoff was likely dumped down into the valley below. that's probably how the poisonous swamp was created. It's pretty horrible. This also recontextualizes the gaping dragon. Sure, it's said to have been warped by hunger, but given where the dragon is, what was it eating? Clearly, literal sewage. No wonder it's diseased and spews such filth across the arena. Also, look here. The runoff in the arena itself sits right above this room near to the swamp bonfire. There, in a chest, is a dragon scale, presumably dropped by the boss right above. There's also what the game files call Prince Isilis. It always felt out of place and somewhat random to find, but especially with the gaping dragon context, it's clearly positioned to feed on the water runoff as well. That can't be classic royalty behaviour, right? All of this didn't feel obvious to me, especially on a first playthrough, and I think that's because of one interesting detail. The depths do look like they'd be pretty rancid, sure, but one thing that doesn't actually look that dirty is the water. Even in the Gaping Dragon arena, the water actually looks pretty clean, for sewage water at least. Not to mention that we don't see any water flowing directly into the swamp below. To me, this would seem to fit the idea that the sewage was from the capital, since we know it has long been abandoned. Thus, the water flow is no longer being polluted by their waste, and instead is surprisingly clean now, continually flowing. Quick aside, can you spot the eyes on this crystal lizard? Yes, it does have eyes. Okay, time's up. Here they are. Cool, right? A bit like the secret basilisk eyes. Okay, back to your regularly scheduled content. There's one last major water source worth checking. The catacombs. Here, a massive waterfall crashes down alongside your descent. The water enters from within the rocks here, but clipping through doesn't reveal any visible cavern system, it's only rendered coming out the rock side. As a side note, the catacombs, unlike Blighttown, is in fact completely underground, and instead the entire area is just very well lit by this giant gap in the cliffside, though it's unclear where this would lead to give such bright light. Nonetheless, let's follow the water. Since water runs downhill, let's simply move upwards, and at the very least we can see what lies above. And it turns out, the waterfall is almost directly beneath Sen's fortress, just outside the secret bonfire. Quite peculiar. There is that sludge at the bottom of Sen's, but otherwise this doesn't really help us. Or so I thought. Because there's something you can spot even in a normal playthrough. Just as you cross the bridge to the fortress, look down to the forest. Do you see it? A running stream, fully animated, curving round towards the side of the fortress above the catacombs waterfall. Could this be the water source, or at least part of the contributing flow? If we follow the water along, it clips through the hillside and finally stops being rendered, but it could certainly be heading in that direction. If we go upstream, it runs much further than expected, beyond even the rendered forest, until it becomes this ethereal view, with the skybox behind that gives almost a Gates of Heaven feeling. It's actually really cool. But why render it so far? Isn't that strange? Unless, somehow, the team was saying something about where it comes from. Taking this angle, it's easier to see the river in relation to the undead burg, Sen's fortress, and the base of the ramparts of Anor Londo. Okay, so it looks like the water runs up towards the capital. But what if that's just a coincidence? Well, it seems like a very deliberate move by the dev team. Because look what happens if I load the Anor Londo map. Here, you can barely see over the wall, and much less look down at Sen's fortress in-game. And yet, if we clip through the map once again, and look down at the same area, there it is, the flowing river, now with more context for how it might have once led from the city. As we've looked at in a previous dive, most of Anor Londo is actually far lower than what we can explore, so the river doesn't actually need to come down from as high as you might imagine. Given the gods were likely responsible for the flood of New Londo, this seems like the best theory for me for how the human city might have been flooded. The river lies on the New Londo side of the Valley of the Drakes, so no problem there, and clearly relates to the gods too. But there's more. This may answer how such a large volume of water could have flooded the city, but it doesn't answer how it was flooded so fast. Even if the river by Sen's fortress was once as powerful as it ends up being in the catacombs, it would still take some time to flood the entire city. Instead, something of that scale doesn't just need a huge source of water, but a stored body of water to release a huge volume all at once. Picture Isengard in Lord of the Rings.
Release the river!
And it turns out, there is in fact one more still, deep body of water nearby that's very easy to overlook. While most of Darkroot is on the opposite side of the Valley of the Drakes, the new area since the DLC begins on the same side as New Londo. And if you've ever farmed green blossoms from these frog enemies, or wanted the wolf ring, you'll have passed by this cliffside, beneath which is a huge volume of water. A pool which, like the rest of this section, wasn't there in Oolacile 300 years ago. As a fun little aside, if you've ever heard a splash as you approach this cliffside, that's actually the frog enemies being activated. It turns out they jump right from the pool beneath, and I for one had never seen it properly before, so here are a few shots. From this angle, looking at the collision data, you can see how close it lies to New Londo. And the fact that it lies right by the Moonlight butterfly, a remnant of Seath, makes it all the more interesting. But we'll look at that in the New Londo series. This, alongside the secret river, for me is the best answer for how New Londo was flooded by the gods, something I've wondered about for years. It's so cool going back to Dark Souls after Elden Ring, which put such an emphasis on water in its lore, and noticing how much groundwork was already there. And to finish, it's pretty interesting that when you overlay Oolacile with Darkroot, the Chasm of the Abyss sits right next to New Londo's Abyss. Not because the Abyss is fixed in that spot, I don't think, but because it behaves like a heavy liquid, sinking down into the earth. For more on that, and the reasoning behind the flood itself, check out this video. Thanks for watching, and let me know what else you'd like to see.